I decided to do narcotic addiction as my chronic illness because I feel like a lot of people don't really understand or know a lot about addiction, and they don't consider it a chronic illness. And a lot of people think that addiction's a choice. So I kind of wanted to do this to try and change the way people view addiction and the stigma behind it. So another one of my main reasons for choosing drug addiction was because I see it a lot in the clinical setting. I work at Lancaster General as a patient care assistant right now, and I sit with a lot of patients who are withdrawing. So I have a lot of clinical exposure to people who have narcotic addictions. So I wanted to learn as much as I can now so that when I'm a nurse, I'm able to provide the best care for my patients who are struggling with addiction. What is a narcotic addiction? Drug addiction is a chronic relapsing neurobiological brain condition that is characterized by compulsive drug-seeking behavior, regardless of negative consequences that takes place related to their using. Addiction involves an imbalance of neurotransmitters in the brain, much like any other mental illness, so like depression. These neurotransmitters are not being produced in the correct amount, which makes addicts susceptible to cravings as well as denials, which are both hallmarks of the disease. Addiction or addicts use because their drug of choice makes their brain feel better. They want to get rid of the cravings, and they want to make themselves feel normal, so they use. Addiction is caused by a biological predispositioning and susceptibility to addiction. So addiction does run in families, but it does skip generations. Addiction, however, is not caused by irresponsible use, emotional stress, previous stressors like abuse or trauma. And then even during sobriety, even if they've been sober for years and years, there's still a chance for relapsing if they don't manage their addiction. If they don't manage their narcotic addiction, they can slip and they can use. And then a narcotic in particular is any type of drug that affects mood or behavior that's used for non-medical purposes. So for example, some narcotics that we're really familiar with are oxycodone, morphine, heroin, methadone, and there's many more. So for my WebQuest searches, I decided to search, what does it feel like to be an addict? And I decided to search this because addiction is commonly misunderstood, like I had said before, and I was hoping that I would find a blog or an article of some sort where someone shared their personal experience with drug addiction firsthand, because I feel if you can read someone's personal experience, you can it can help you, who's not the narcotic addict, or it can help the narcotic addict see that somebody is explaining the way that they feel so that others can understand how they're feeling. So that's why I decided to search that. And then for my search 2, I decided to do Narcotics Anonymous. I was hoping to find some information about NA and benefits of attending this support group and what NA is all about, their mission and everything. Because support groups are a very helpful way to manage feelings related to a condition like addiction. And then for my search 3, I decided to search for tools to help recovering addicts. So there's a lot of time outside of, people go to rehab, things like that, or they go to support groups, but they have time to themselves outside of these programs. So I decided to search for extra tools that I can share with patients to help them manage their addiction and keep them from relapsing. So those were my WebQuest searches. So for my first one, I attached the article here, but I searched what does it feel like to be an addict, and I found an article in the Huffington Post, and it was about what does it feel like to have an opioid addiction. The author is a behavioral pharmacologist who struggles with an opioid addiction. He shortly after he finished his doctorate program, he battled with addiction for 22 years. He went from casual using in college to spending the last year and a half of his addiction homeless. So he did a complete 180, and he decided to write this article for the parents of the children that he treats for addiction. He wanted them to understand that he knows firsthand what they're going through because he lived it. Also, because of his education and research, he wants to understand what's going. He wants other people to understand that things are actually going on inside of the brain. People aren't choosing to have a narcotic addiction. That there's something going on that's making them do the things that they do. He talks about the science behind opioid addiction. So science has shown that opioid addiction is a disease of the brain, and continual use of opioids day after day or year after year permanently alters the brain on a cellular and molecular basis. Alterations that manifest as behavioral changes geared towards survival of the individual. So he wanted to make addiction easier to understand. He compares addiction to hunger. So he talks about what it feels like after you don't eat for a couple of hours, days, anything like that. The only thing that you can think about is how you're hungry and how you need food. So the craving for food is the brain's way of driving you to survive. So you need to eat to survive, and it's your brain's is telling you that. So the purpose of the cravings are survival. To add another layer, he talks then about famine. He talks about what do you do when you're hungry and you have no food because of a famine. He talks about a quote-unquote black market for food, where the food's very expensive and illegal. So what would you do if you're starving? What would you do? Would you break the law? Would you steal and eat and live? How much would you sacrifice? How much would you give up to survive? So hunger can be sustained for days, while cravings for opioids can only be sustained for a few hours. Everything but the need for an opioid seems to slip away because it's all they can focus on because they need it to survive. They have no other choice. Their brain's telling them that they need it. So he's not trying to excuse the behaviors. He's simply trying to help those who don't have an addiction understand what it's like to have an addiction. He knows it's difficult to understand, and he talks about how he knows it's difficult for family members to understand or loved ones to understand why they stole from you or why they were mean to somebody that they loved. They aren't doing these. He talks about how they're not doing these things to hurt you or doing them to survive. At times, we're desperate, and desperation makes us do things that are wrong, he said. What does it mean to be so desperate in starvation that you will hurt the ones you love to end hunger? Or in the case of a narcotic addiction, what would you do to make the cravings go away? So he says he cannot explain why we hurt the ones that we love. No one ever told them opioids would alter their brains. I think this article sheds some light onto addiction in a way that's easier to understand for those who do not want to believe that addiction is a chronic relapsing brain condition. If loved ones understand what it's truly like to have an addiction, they can provide better care and support for their recovering family member or loved one, whoever it is. They can just be there for them, and ultimately that'll help both parties emotionally, and it'll help everyone manage the feelings associated with the addiction. I decided to do Narcotics Anonymous as my second search. Narcotics Anonymous is a nonprofit fellowship or society for men and women who have had major drug problems. The group is ran by and consists of recovering addicts who meet regularly in order to help each other maintain sobriety and stay sober. There is only one requirement for membership, and it is the desire to stop using. There's no membership fees, there's no pledges, there's no signing into meetings, no one's really forcing you to go. So anyone can join, regardless of age, race, sexual identity, creed, religion, or lack of religion. Commonly thought, a lot of people think that NA is a religiously affiliated group, and it's not a religiously affiliated group. Even in the 12 steps, it does talk about God, but in general, they're talking more about a higher power. It doesn't have to be God, but they use God in the literature that they follow just to keep things uniform, but it is not a religious group. NA is not interested in what or how someone used, nor are they interested in your old connections. Not interested in they're only interested in what you want to do about your drug problem and how they can help support you. From this group, members have learned from one another's experiences. Regular meetings and attendance is what helps people get clean and stay sober. So regular attendance is everyday attendance for the first 90 days of sobriety, and then from there it changes a little bit from person to person. NA is a 12-step program, and I provided a link that tells you what the 12 steps are, and it kind of explains each of the 12 steps, but I am going to mention them. So step 1 is we admit that we're powerless over our addiction, that our lives have become unmanageable. Step 2, we come to believe a power greater than ourselves that restore us to sanity. Step 3, we made the decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Step 4, we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Step 5, we admitted to God and ourselves and to another human being of the exact nature of our wrongs. Step 6, we are entirely ready to have God remove all of these defects of character. Step 7, we humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings. Step 8, we made a list of all persons that we have harmed and became willing to make amends with all of them. Step 9, we made direct amends with such people whenever possible, except for when it could do injury or harm to you or them. We continued to take personal inventory when we were wrong and promptly admitted it. Step 11, we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. Step 12, having the spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to addicts and practice all of these principles with all of our affairs. So NA follows these 12 simple steps, and they allow members to integrate them into their everyday lives. And these steps are the principles. They work. You just have to follow them, and you have to do them. You're not going to get better just from going to a meeting. You have to work with the 12 steps. And then NA also uses sponsors, and a sponsor is another recovering addict who's been sober for X amount of time, and it's somebody who basically takes new members under their wing and provides them with support and guidance. And then below, I just provided a YouTube link to a video where a recovering addict kind of explains the 12 steps, which I thought was a good way to kind of understand. It is a 15-minute video, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good video. So I decided to link that there for you guys if you wanted to watch. So some similarities would be that addiction can leave you hopeless, fearful, angry, and misunderstood, just like the experience that Linda and Karen Bush share in the book that we're reading. Drug addiction has the potential to destroy relationships, and much like Linda, her relationship with her husband. They got divorced with everything that happened with the lupus. So support groups like NA can be very helpful in regards to recovering from a narcotic addiction. And this week's reading talked about support groups. And then much like any other chronic illness, you're not supposed to have your addiction consume you. So everyone has bad days, and it's moving past them and doing things that help you get along from that bad day, which is another thing that Linda and Karen talk about in the book. Mindfulness is really similar to Karen and Linda's accessorizing because it allows you to think and react before the situation. The mindfulness is something I talked about with those tools, the 11 tools to help a recovering addict. So I liked that mindfulness was kind of what Karen and Linda described too. And then drug addiction has the ability to cause a person to isolate themselves and experience disability. So people isolate themselves when they don't know what else to do, which happens a lot with other chronic illnesses as well. And then drug addiction can be placed on all 9 parts of Dr. Corbin's illness trajectory, which we wrote the paper about last week. So I'm not going to go too much into detail about that at all. So we all know the 9 steps from the paper. So some differences is that a lot of people don't recognize narcotic addiction as a chronic illness. People think that addiction's a choice, like having a narcotic addiction isn't a choice and it happened because they were using irresponsibly, or that something traumatic happened and they decided to use drugs. So I think that that's just a difference between all the readings, just because a lot of people don't want to recognize addiction as a chronic illness. So it all stems back to the imbalance of neurotransmitters in the brain. And then drug addictions also cause people to do things they don't normally do. And then addiction is the strong craving, and it puts the body into survival mode. So people will do just about anything to get rid of the craving. So addiction is just a little bit different from some of the stuff we've been reading about, because it's more of a mental pathophysiology than, but it all comes back to managing their feelings. And then I did a little bit of additional information about rehabilitation programs. So they're available for recovering addicts too, and there's a lot of different types of rehab, and it should be chosen based off of each person's individual needs. So rehab's a safe space, and it allows for recovery, basically. So I put like a link to a website that explains in detail about the different types of rehab and benefits of rehab and things like that. And obviously rehab is going to help people gain coping skills and learn to manage their feelings and their addiction. So being understood by others ultimately helps addicts manage their own feelings about their addiction. Having loved ones understand what narcotic addictions are, as well as understanding what they feel like, helps them manage their own feelings about their loved one's addiction. But it can also help their loved one's feelings manage their own feelings as well. So if both parties are understanding what an addiction is, what it feels like to have one, there's just going to be better support, and better support ultimately leads to managing the feelings associated with a narcotic addiction better and keeping people from relapsing. So then I talked support groups like NA are safe spaces for recovering addicts, and it allows them to share their experiences and support one another, allows them to have something to look forward to, and support groups are a great way to manage feelings associated with narcotic addictions. And then the 11 recovery tools I provided also allow for narcotic addicts to manage their feelings in a way that is not using when they're not at a support group. So they're managing their feelings related to addiction, kind of doing things that make them feel better. And things like that are all in all how you manage the feelings associated with narcotic addiction. And then these are just my references followed by my image URLs. Thanks for watching.